Hey, I feel like this video was a long time coming. It really isn't that far from the truth to say that these games have changed my life. I know how extreme and probably silly that sounds, but it was just under a year ago that I first caught Dark Souls 1 on sale. It was pure chance, the right place at the right time, and I bought it on a whim. At first I wasn't sure. It was vague and really like no other RPG I'd ever played before. Leveling up Resistance is testament to how much I didn't know what I was doing. I nearly gave up twice. But there was something about it that kept pulling me back. It was addicting and just, well, really fun. It felt like a journey, and the constant running inner monologue I had was, can I beat this game? Once I defeated Gwyn, I had the satisfactory feeling that just lacks in other games. Upon completion, I moved on to Dark Souls 2, almost immediately, and I found it to still be a top title and enjoyable, but it didn't quite reach that tier of Dark Souls 1. Then I moved on to Bloodborne, waiting for that Game of the Year edition, and this brought back some of the magic for me. The combat especially just being some of the best they've ever done. And obviously this year I got into Dark Souls 3, the first game to be released that I played day one. It was a new experience to be able to discover things the same as everybody else. And that brings us up to Demon's Souls, the last game in the series that I hadn't played, and incidentally, the first game of the series. It was an interesting experience to go backwards to the game that spawned such a vast community of players and see for myself just how the gameplay was initially. The transition, for the most part, was absolutely fine. You have to acknowledge that because you are going backwards, certain advancements the developers have made aren't going to be there. For instance, while locked onto an enemy, your rolling movements are limited, giving some questionable results in crucial moments. This took a little bit of getting used to. This was the main issue. Other minor things in Demon's Souls is the lack of a decent merchant in the Nexus. It was a real shame he only sold crescent grass. It doesn't make the game any easier by just having him sell the larger grass. It basically comes down to a convenience and time issue. It felt a little unnecessary to backtrack through some other world, sit through 2 loading screens just to get to a merchant. Or, at least have the merchant near where you spawn. The blacksmith from Stonefang was right next to where you spawn. Little things like that are just a nice convenience for the player. Every Soulsborne game is difficult on a first playthrough, and I think Demon's Souls is no exception. Not having a flask that refills upon death is ultimately what makes this game difficult. On a blind playthrough, you're going to go through your grass like cows in a field. This essentially means a lot of forward thinking is needed. Save your good grass for the boss, chew on the little grass for the bits in between. Regardless, healing supplies can be a problem when you don't know what's coming next. Another key factor in Demon's Souls is the lack of checkpoints. Dark Souls 1 made excellent use of shortcuts. Dark Souls 2 had bonfires really close together. Bloodborne, again, made use of shortcuts. And Dark Souls 3 was kind of a combination of the two. There were certain areas, not every area, but a few areas that didn't have shortcuts. The level was your entire run-up to a boss. This was brutal. It really made boss fights more intense. The boss didn't even have to be that challenging. It was just knowing that if you die, you're right back at the start again. Okay, so let's talk a bit about the world design of Demon's Souls. The Nexus was like the hunter's dream from Bloodborne, except in Demon's Souls you have 4 worlds open to you right from the beginning. I really like that style. I love that you can start anywhere you want to. I'll admit, it made me feel a little bit lost and unsure which path was the best path, but it's all about learning and taking chances. The Nexus, however, doesn't quite match up to Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1. Dark Souls 1 has the best world map in my opinion. I love how vast it feels both horizontally and vertically. If you're feeling ballsy, you can drop down to the catacombs right from the start if you want to. The way the levels connect up is so cool. Bloodborne and Demon's Souls kind of suffer from the same feeling of being disconnected from the rest of the world. The actual level design from Demon's Souls was interesting to me. As a player who went backwards with the knowledge of the other games, it was cool to see where some of the ideas originated from. Defilement feels like a large Blighttown area. Boletaria feels like Undead Burg. Tower of Latria feels like Erythral Dungeons. I really get it now when people talk about From Software repeating themselves. They can get stuck with one good idea and then just keep doing it again, in a slightly different style. But hey, if they veered off into something else, then it wouldn't be Souls games, I suppose. The only real problem with this is it can get a bit stale. You're like, okay, so this is the Blighttown poison area of the game. It's like you're just expecting and waiting for it to happen. And regurgitating ideas is what brings me to my next point. Demon's Souls was the original game, and from this you can see which bosses sparked off inspiration for the future bosses. Dragon God became Bed of Chaos, for example. Both terrible bosses, mind, but almost identical mechanics to them. Penetrator became Artorias. Their opening cutscenes are practically the same. Storm King became Yorm, etc, etc. And speaking of bosses, the bosses in this game were interesting from a retrospective standpoint. As you'd expect, the bosses are quite basic. If you're at all familiar with Souls games, then these bosses aren't going to trip you up that much. It was more the number of what I would describe as gimmicky bosses. The Tower Knight, the Adjudicator, Storm King, Dragon God, Fool's Idol. The real challenge to these bosses is not knowing the gimmick. Once you know it, the boss is no longer threatening, as almost all lethality has been removed. I, however, don't necessarily have gripes with gimmick bosses. They can actually feel like a nice change of pace, and something different. The game still had its challenging fights like Flame Lurker, Penetrator, and King Allen. Oh, and speaking of King Allen, I regard him as the final boss and not that weird blob thing at the end. In summation, Demon's Souls explained a lot. It was like speaking to the parent of an abused child and finally figuring out why they are so troubled. As ever, the blind run is going to be your most punishing. Souls games aren't really hard games. They just crush you in ways you were not expecting. With 2020 hindsight, you aren't going to make those mistakes again, and the game becomes marginally easier the more you play. I'm just glad and happy that I've played every Souls title to completion now. I'll almost likely play it again from start to finish at some point. I heard magic was OP, but not really being a magic user, I went for the melee instead. These games can be good for replayability, and so next time I could try out for that sweet magic. So, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.